There is a particular kind of exhaustion that sleep does not fix. A person wakes after a full night's rest and feels the pull immediately, the deep, almost gravitational desire to simply stay, to not get up, to lie in bed and let the hours pass, not because they are lazy, not because anything is physically wrong, but because something in them has quietly stopped wanting to participate in the day. They drag themselves upright out of obligation, move through the motions, and count the hours until they can return to the one place that feels bearable: the bed, the dark, the stillness. And they judge themselves harshly for it, because the world has only one word for this, and that word is laziness. Carl Jung would have told them the world is wrong, because Jung understood that the desire to lie down all day is almost never about the body. It is a message from the psyche, and it is one of the most misread messages a human being can receive. Before we go further, understand what this is and is not. This is not a claim that exhaustion is never physical. Sometimes it is, and that matters. And this is not a permission slip to disappear into bed forever. What Jung identified was something more precise: that when a person's tiredness has no physical cause, when rest doesn't touch it, when the pull toward the bed is really a pull away from their own life, then something specific is happening beneath the surface, and it is trying to tell them something they have refused to hear any other way. Over the next several minutes, we're going to trace what that pull actually is, why the psyche withdraws a person from the world, and the single shift Jung believed transforms this exhaustion from a symptom into a doorway. Stay until the end, because the final part explains why the bed is not the enemy, and why fighting it the way most people do makes it worse. Let's begin with what is really happening when a person cannot get out of bed. Jung had a concept at the center of his psychology that changes how this looks entirely. He spoke of psychic energy, what he called libido, meaning not merely sexual energy but the whole life force of a person, the fuel that drives their interest, their desire, their engagement with the world. And Jung observed that this energy is not fixed in place. It moves. Normally it flows outward, into work, relationships, goals, the 1,000 things a person cares about. But under certain conditions, it reverses. It withdraws from the outer world and sinks inward, down into the unconscious. And when that happens, the outer world goes gray. The things that used to pull a person no longer pull. The energy that used to carry them out into the day has been pulled back inside. And what is left, on the surface, is a person who cannot move, who wants only to lie down because the fuel for living has gone somewhere they cannot see. This is the first thing to understand. The exhaustion is not an absence of energy. The energy has not vanished. It has been withdrawn, pulled beneath the surface by the psyche itself for a reason. And Jung insisted there is always a reason. The unconscious does not withdraw a person's life force from the world as a malfunction. It does it as a correction. Something in the life the person has been living has become false, or hollow, or unlivable. And rather than let them keep pouring their energy into a life that is no longer right, the psyche does something drastic. It cuts the supply. It pulls the energy back down, and it forces a halt. The bed is not laziness. It is the psyche pulling the emergency brake on a life that was heading in the wrong direction. If this is describing something you've lived, the tiredness that sleep won't fix, the pull toward the bed that feels like more than fatigue, comment the word tired below. Jung believed that naming this pull as a message rather than a failure is the first step to understanding what it wants. Because the second thing Jung understood is why the energy withdraws in the first place. Jung observed that this inward collapse most often comes when a person has been living too long from the surface of themselves, from the persona, the mask, the role they perform to meet everyone's expectations. They have been doing what they are supposed to do, holding the job, playing the part, meeting the obligations, being who everyone needs them to be. And for a while, they can run on willpower. But the deeper self, what Jung called the self with a capital S, has needs of its own. And when those needs are ignored long enough, when a person spends years pouring their life force into a version of existence that does not actually nourish them, the unconscious eventually refuses to cooperate. It stops releasing energy for a life it no longer believes in, and the person, mystified, finds that they simply cannot get up for a life that, on paper, they are supposed to want. This is why the exhaustion so often arrives precisely when nothing is obviously wrong. The person has the job, the relationship, the outward markers of a functioning life, and yet they can barely rise to meet it, because the problem was never the outer circumstances. It is that somewhere along the way they stopped living from the inside. They built a life that satisfied everyone's expectations and slowly starved the one person it was supposed to be for, themselves. And the desire to lie in bed all day is the deep self's last, desperate form of protest, a refusal expressed through the body to keep animating a life that has lost its meaning. The tiredness is grief. It is the mourning of a self that has been neglected for too long, finally lying down and refusing to be ignored. Jung connected this to something he saw in the middle of many lives, though it can come at any age, a moment when the whole structure a person built begins to feel empty, and the energy that maintained it drains away. Most people experience this as depression and treat it purely as an illness to be eliminated. Jung did not deny the suffering, but he saw something the purely medical view misses. He saw that the depression, the withdrawal, the collapse into the bed was often the psyche trying to end one chapter of a life so another could begin. The energy had gone underground, not to abandon the person, but to do work in the dark, to dissolve the old false structure and prepare something truer to take its place. What looked like death was very often a kind of gestation, but Jung did not romanticize this, and neither should we. Because there is a way this goes wrong, and it is the way most people handle it. The instinct when a person finds themselves unable to get out of bed is to fight it, to force themselves up through sheer discipline, to shame themselves into motion, to treat the exhaustion as an enemy to be defeated and pushed through. And Jung understood why this so often fails. Because when the psyche has withdrawn a person's energy for a reason, forcing the body back into the old life without ever asking why the energy left is like bailing water out of a boat without patching the hole. The person may drag themselves through the day on willpower, but the exhaustion returns, heavier each time, because the underlying message has still not been heard. They are treating the symptom while ignoring the summons, and the psyche, unheard, only pulls harder until the fatigue that was once a whisper becomes something that cannot be overridden at all. Jung's path was the opposite, and it takes courage. Instead of fighting the withdrawal, he would have a person turn toward it, to ask the exhaustion what it wants, to treat the desire to lie down not as a defect to be corrected, but as a communication to be understood. Because the energy went somewhere. It descended into the unconscious. And that means the answer is down there too, in the very place the person is being pulled toward. The pull toward stillness, toward the dark, toward the bed, is in some sense the psyche pulling them toward the inner work that has been waiting, not to lie there forever, numbly, but to finally go inward and ask the questions the busy outer life never allowed. What am I actually living for? Which parts of this life are truly mine, and which did I build only to be acceptable? What have I abandoned in myself that is now refusing to be abandoned any longer? This is the shift that changes everything. The exhaustion stops being a wall and becomes a door. The same withdrawal that felt like a person's life ending becomes the beginning of the descent Jung considered essential to becoming whole, the journey down into the neglected self, to retrieve what was buried and build a life that the deep self will actually agree to fund. Because Jung observed that when a person finally listens, when they let the descent do its work and begin to realign their life with what is gen true for them rather than what is merely expected, the energy returns. Not because they forced it, but because the psyche no longer has any reason to withhold it. The life force flows back outward on its own because at last, it has a life worth flowing into. And there is a deeper truth beneath all of this. The one Jung most wanted people to understand. The desire to lie down all day is not weakness. It is often a sign of a person whose deep self is still alive enough to protest. Many people never feel this pull at all. Not because they are healthier, but because they have so completely identified with their mask that the inner self has gone silent. And they march through a hollow life, feeling nothing, mistaking numbness for function. The one who cannot get out of bed is, paradoxically, the one whose soul is still fighting for a real life. The exhaustion is the sound of something in them that refuses to keep pretending. It is not the sign of a person who has given up. It is the sign of a person whose depths are demanding that they finally begin. And now, I need to speak to you directly. If you know this exhaustion, the kind sleep doesn't fix, the pull toward the bed that feels like more than tiredness, the gray that has settled over a life that is supposed to be fine, and if you have been fighting it, shaming yourself for it, calling yourself lazy and weak for a heaviness you cannot will away, then hear what Jung would have told you. You are not lazy. Your energy has not disappeared. It has been pulled inward by a part of you wiser than your schedule because some piece of the life you are living is no longer true and the deepest part of you refuses to keep funding it. The bed is not your enemy. The tiredness is not your failure. It is a summons. Stop fighting it long enough to ask it what it wants. Go down into the stillness it keeps pulling you toward, not to disappear, but to finally listen to the self you have been too busy to hear. Because on the other side of that descent is not more exhaustion. It is the return of a life force that has simply been waiting all this time for you to build something worth waking up for. If this reached something real in you, don't let it fade when the screen goes dark. In the next video, I want to show you what Jung discovered about the descent itself. What actually happens when a person stops fighting the darkness and goes down into it on purpose, and the specific signs that the energy is beginning to turn and rise again. Because knowing why the bed pulls you is only half of it. The other half is knowing how to come back. And Jung understood exactly how. I'll see you there.